Bertolt Brecht was one of the great literary figures of the 20th century. Born in 1898 in Bavaria in Germany, he grew to become one of the best-known playwrights of the European continent and indeed the world. What made Brecht controversial was not so much his plays, which were in the main very brilliant, but his political associations with the left, with Marxism, with the Hegelian dialectic, with the communist parties, though he was never a member, and finally his controversial and in fact somewhat reluctant decision to settle down in East Berlin in the German Democratic Republic after the Second World War. Very happy today to have with me Stephen Parker, who has written what I regard as the definitive biography of Bertolt Brecht, A Literary Life, published by Bloomsbury. Stephen, what attracted you to this figure?
You know, Tariq, I always read Brecht because I work in German studies. And not only that, I found that whenever I was doing one of my research projects, he was always there. And already in the 1980s, I thought, really, there isn't a very good biography of Brecht, neither in German nor in English. And so I started to think I would love to do that. I'd love to write that book. But it was at the time of the Cold War, and just so many of the important archives were not properly open, and so it didn't seem to me to be a particularly realistic project at that time. And instead I was working on a literary magazine, Sinn und Form, and in fact when the Berlin Wall came down, I had a great opportunity to go to Berlin and access the archives there relating to Sinn und Form, because Sinn und Form was the journal of the East Berlin Academy of Arts. And in the archives, I found an enormous wealth of documents. And Brecht's name, again and again, was there because he was one of the most prominent founder members of the Academy and one of the foremost authors of Sinn und Form from 1949 till his death in 1956. At the time, when I was really working on Sinn und Form, I thought that other people would come in and make use of these documents, quite a few of which I published, and I wrote essays about Brecht and Sinn und Form. In the new Brecht biography that was bound to happen after the Cold War, there was never that really major and authoritative biography that was written at the time. So I realised I don't know, it's a few years ago now, that it was a real prospect that I could do it. And so I just set about making time to enable me to do that. And I did that by creating this space of 5 years.
Now, a few years after the reunification of Germany, when the triumphalism in the West was more or less treating everything that emerged from East Germany, anything, whether it was music or art or cinema or plays or poetry, with deep contempt and tarring everyone with the so-called totalitarian brush. Brecht, like others, was, kept at a distance. And then I recall that there was a meeting of the German Social Democratic Party, not a public event, a private meeting, where Helmut Schmidt, not a great radical by any means, got up and addressed the conference. And he said, I want to tell our party members one thing. We look down on the East Germans, he said. This is unacceptable behavior because Germany is now united again, and many good things came out of there. And he said, and apart from anything else, if you were to ask me to organize a plinth of the 3 great names in German literature today, from the beginning till now, my 3 names would be Goethe, Heine, and Brecht, and there was a gasp. He understood, despite being of a completely opposed political view to Brecht, how great he was. This is now slowly coming back, Stephen, is it not? That this understanding that he was a major literary figure, whether or not you agreed with his politics.
Well, precisely, Tariq. And time moves on and the emphases in politics change. And of course, none of us are always on the right side of particular arguments. Yeah. My sense was that Brecht often found the more interesting side in the arguments at the time. What of course remains is the genius, the literary genius. My book is called A Literary Life, not a political life, because it was a literary life. Brecht wrote every day, and he wrote in notebooks, producing drafts that were of breathtaking quality as first draft. And there are very few people who can do that.
A very turbulent genius.
Yes.
Both in his personal life and in his literary life.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, Brecht was, everyone can see it immediately, one of the great contrarians, temperamentally, than someone who would take against any position that was represented in the company he was in, and seek as he would see it, the productive counterpoint, and seek then through debate and argument to find a superior position in things. He was restless and relentlessly so.
In your book you point this out. And you say that, you quote someone as saying that often when one had a conversation with Brecht, or Brecht himself said, when I'm in the company of 9 or 10 people, I deliberately provoke them to see how they will reply to my argument, even though I don't myself believe what I'm saying.
Indeed. And of course that feeds into his genius as a playwright. You may recall as well that his very close friend and stage designer, Caspar Neer, said that working together with Brecht meant that you were working with someone who would be able to hold in his head 3 or possible trajectories for any given scene.
Let's start where your book starts, with his upbringing and personal life. A very tormented family history, mother whom he absolutely adored, getting ill, father installing semi-openly a mistress in the house, the boys, particularly Brecht, at the throat of his brother, his younger brother, turbulence, and then adolescence, sexuality, in which he, you know, for those times, of course, this was probably normal, but a young woman in particular, or even a young man reading those sections of the book today would say, oh my God, what a pig.
Mm-hmm. Well, sure, absolutely. Driven and egoistic and temperamentally really on the edge always, and liable to do absolutely the unexpected, which took himself by surprise. And he has these moments of profound regret as to what he'd done, but an inability to control those impulses, strongly sexual at the time, and yes, a tormented young man.
Stephen, sexual, but bisexual?
I don't know.
Some of his work, you know, dedicated to male friends, and the descriptions of the great times he had with them, and, you know, walking through forests and swimming in rivers, you do feel homoerotic undertones.
For sure, for sure. And the great models, of course, are Verlaine and Rimbaud, and the story of them, and that homoeroticism feeds into quite a lot of the early work. There's a dimension to it in the early play Bâle, of course, as well as in the poem. So I didn't feel, though, able to judge finally.
Then we move on to his first real interest in politics, which is the big upheavals in Germany. He says, I am a man of the left. These are my people. And then comes the decision when they lose and are defeated and the Nazis win and Hitler is appointed chancellor, that he leaves, like many other German writers. He leaves Germany and, or even before that moment, first travels around in Europe, wonderful descriptions in your book, playing chess with Benjamin in Denmark and their conversations. I mean, those must be amongst the most, unrepeatable, if you like, conversations between two powerful German intellectuals of the 20th century.
Yes, absolutely. They are truly extraordinary. And I felt a huge privilege, I must say, to be working with these materials, particularly Benjamin's diaries of his summers with Brecht. The account of the summer of 1938 in Svendborg, Denmark, the last time they played chess together, of course, was at the very, very low point of the 1930s, before the war, of course, where Nazi expansionism was already happening and where Brecht had no illusions anymore about what was happening in the Soviet Union, neither he nor Benjamin, of course. And they agreed that Stalin's rule was a form of a monarchy, a reactionary system by that point in time. And this was hugely problematic, of course, hugely, and Brecht resolved that he wouldn't speak publicly about this because the very fact of the revolution remained important, so important, and there could be hope that after the Red Army had defeated Nazism in the only war, then in the war that would surely happen, there could be, after all, a renewal of the revolution.
And yet, I mean, in itself, Stephen, that whole period of, it's almost like could be a Brecht play.
You may have noticed that I divided my book into 5 parts.
Yeah.
And it does have something of the form of a traditional 5-act drama.
It does.
And it uses the conventions, if you like, or the notions of empathy and critical distance as the means to establish a tone and writing about that extraordinary odyssey which took in so many countries, changing countries more often than my shoes, as he put it. It was very interesting to see not only how Brecht was politically very disturbed by unfettered American capitalism, but how emotionally he responded, he reacted against the whole Hollywood industry.
He did, very strongly. But you quote, even before he went to the United States, his brother Walter had arrived in New York to experiment with paper and paper making, since the family was involved in paper factories. And when he writes to Brecht, encouraging him to come and at least see New York, Brecht is quite jealous of him, but then he responds characteristically with a poem, which is this, to his brother. I can hear you saying, he talks of America, he understands nothing about it, he has never been there. But believe you me, you understand me perfectly well when I talk of America, and the best thing about America is that we understand it. Which is something, as I was reading this, I felt quite applicable today too.
Yes.
In many parts of the world it applies. But yet there's the other side of America, which he liked, the jazz, folk songs, going to hear Burlive sing, which he enjoyed greatly. Leadbelly blew his mind.
Yes.
And I didn't know this, which I read first in your book, that Bob Dylan, in his autobiography, said that it was hearing Brecht songs being sung in Greenwich Village which made him what he was.
Dylan's lyrics really energized by hearing Brecht's poems and songs. You see, Brecht began as a songwriter himself, playing his lyrics to the guitar.
You know, your book shows it most clearly, but I read a lot about Brecht's absolute obsession with Rudyard Kipling. You know, he loved his songs or his rhymed verses about the British Empire. And I think what Brecht liked the most about Kipling, that regardless of his politics and his imperialism, Kipling was the only writer during the Raj, British Raj in India, who managed to convey the accents of the ordinary white people there, i.e. the Tommies, the British soldiers. And it's one of the poems Brecht turned, which was Kipling's poem about these English soldiers coming to fight for Queen Victoria, and Brecht's response to Kipling, which was very, very powerful, and implying, yes, they went to fight for her. You know, out rolled warships, soldiers, weaponry, back came shipments of tea and cloths and gold, and, you know, mixing the two together. And the last one was, and then this soldier without a leg goes to the Caledonian market.
Yes, yes.
And is hit on the head.
Well, precisely. And there is a brutality, of course, in the treatment of soldiers there, when they return to their home country and are not thanked for their efforts.
Stephen, one of the other things which comes very clear is that even relationships with people, you know, broadly speaking, on his side in Hollywood, I mean, Charlie Chaplin, Charles Lawton, Orson Welles, whom he met and talked to and engaged with, finally he got fed up with them. He felt that they were too much in the grip of that system.
Yes, for sure. And he could never operate successfully within that system. And what's amazing about his years in Hollywood is how he holds on to his approach, his aesthetic understanding of things. He couldn't do any other because these were really extremely ingrained emotionally as well as intellectually. And so he really was always looking to, well, either change the whole thing, which was obviously an impossibility for him individually, or then leave and go back to Europe and to a place where he felt he could work more productively.
That brings us to the end of the war, and Brecht is faced with a choice. Leave the US, sure, but where to go? And before he left the United States, there was that comical episode before the House of Un-American Activities, which is one of the few pieces of Brecht we have on film and tape, in which he is asked, were you ever or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? And he says no.
Yes, he replied truthfully, he hadn't.
Mr. Brecht, are you a member of the Communist Party, or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
May I read my statement? I'll answer this question. May I read my statement?
Would you submit your statement to the chairman? Many of your writings have been based upon the philosophy of Lenin, Marx?
No, I don't think that is quite correct.
Now, I'll read the words and ask you if this is true.
Please.
Learn now the simple truth, you for whom the time has come at last. It is not too late. Learn now the ABC. It is not enough, but learn it still. Fear not, be not downhearted. Again, you must learn the lesson. You must be ready to take over. You must be...
Excuse me, that is the wrong translation. That is not right. Just 1 second, I'll give you the correct text.
We shall free the world of shadow. Every shop and every room, every road and every meadow, all the world will be our own. Did you write that, Mr. Brecht?
No, I wrote a German poem, but that is very different you see, from this thing.
And then the day after this trial was finished, he and Joseph Losey, the great film director, boarded a plane together to get out of the United States.
Absolutely, absolutely, and flew to Paris in the first instance, yes. And from there, Brecht went to Switzerland.
Yeah, but he, you know, it's interesting. The Swiss have this image, or self-created image, of we were neutral, we are not political people, all we do is make money, we leave people alone. But Brecht was hounded in Switzerland by the Swiss intelligence, the Swiss police.
And his return to the United States, of course, was blocked. And so he had few options. He'd gone to Switzerland, it's important to say here, because he had royalties from the performances of his plays in Zurich. The Zurich Schauspielhaus had been the only major theatre in continental Europe that had been prepared to put his plays on. One must see that side of things, of course, as well. So he had enough funds to live for a year when he went back. But the treatment then such that, yes, he was regarded as an enemy alien and should leave the country as soon as possible.
And now comes the choice. His friends, one of his friends from the 1920s, Johann Becker, is the Minister for Culture in the new East Germany, putting pressure on him to come. Others in West Germany, mainly dramaturgs and theatre directors, are putting pressure on him to come. The Austrians at one point put pressure on him to come and run a theatre in Austria. And yet he feels that in both Austria and the new Western Germany that is being built, he might not have the freedom to do what he wants to do because of the market, because of money, or what, Stephen?
He was trying to explore his options, and they were not finally very great, which is very surprising to hear. Perhaps one has this image of the great Brecht coming back to Europe and choosing to have an Austrian passport and settling initially in Switzerland. The options were much more limited, and in fact there is a moment before the 17th of June 1953, that critical early moment precisely in the early history of East Germany, where they still haven't been granted a theatre of their own, where Brecht has been attacked again and again as a formalist, which is really the artistic equivalent of being a Trotskyist in that context. Severe attacks, and the wish to have the Theater am Schiffbauer Damm, which had been the scene of the Threepenny Opera's great success
in West Berlin.
No, that's in East Berlin.
That's in East.
Yeah, in that great success in the late 20s, the wish to have that theatre was actually responded to by the party leadership with the instruction that the garrisoned People's Police should be given that theatre. A series of events were staged designed to expose the formalist nature of Brecht's theatre, with a view, in my view, to either forcing him out or securing his recantation of his theoretical position.
Galileo Galilei.
precisely, that was the Galileo moment.
After the 17th of June 1953, when the East Berlin workers' uprising was crushed, Brecht wrote that poem, the quatrain, I call it, essentially addressed to the Central Committee of the party. Dear comrades, it seems that the problem you confront is the people. Why not dissolve the people and elect a new one? Which is again so apposite today when you look at different parts of the world.
Yeah.
It's almost, you feel, what the EU elite is saying to the Greeks. Dissolve your people and elect a new one. So a lot of his message, if you like, using a bad word for a minute, is pretty universal. And that is what gives him his greatness.
Yes. Well, he was quite unsentimental in his view of humanity. He believed simply that working people should take possession of their own lives and of the political institutions that surrounded them, and he believed that it would be a very long struggle, of course, and that there would be countless defeats on the way. Catastrophic defeats.
Well, he was right, as we know. But he died in today's world. If you say someone's died at 58, it seems quite young now. And you feel what he could have done if he'd had another 10, 15, 20 years of life in him, what he would have written, how he would have reacted to the world. And yet, in some of his work, there are forebodings of imminent death from quite an early age.
Indeed. He knew always that his life would not be a long one, and his relationship with his mother, who died in 1920, was terribly important here. He had a kinship of suffering with her because he was a very sickly child and adolescent with a heart complaint which returned to plague him in his final years, of course, compounded by other health problems. And so he set out in the mid-20s when he realised very much that he had to live a disciplined life if he was to achieve what he set out to achieve. He devised a whole programme to write 40 or so plays, he thought, and he wrote so many plays.
Quite a lot of them. And yet at the same time, he was worried that because he flaked out, and some people thought he was dead, in his message, his last testament to his long-standing partner, Helena Weigel, he says, make sure I'm really dead before they bury me. I don't want to be buried alive. And she did. She called in a specialist who said, yes, he is dead.
Yes, and his femoral artery on his left thigh was severed, and there was blood everywhere, and that request was born of a profound mistrust of doctors who had failed to diagnose him correctly all his life, and so really he couldn't trust them to pronounce him dead.
Stephen, one of Brecht's closest friends from an early age in the 20s, late 20s, was the famous German publisher, or someone who became the famous German publisher, Peter Suhrkamp. He published most of Brecht's work, kept it going in West Germany, selling rights all over the world. And your biography is now being translated by Suhrkamp. Knowing German publishers as I do and the German intelligentsia, for them to actually publish a biography of one of their greatest poets and playwrights written by an English scholar is something quite remarkable.
Well, that's very kind of you to say that, Tariq. I do regard it as the highest accolade.
Thank you.